And so, Aaron, why don't we start with communications and digital? Walk us through a little bit of what some of the important highlights are for someone getting their campaign off the ground to focus on in regards to communications, and maybe even just help us understand what's the role that communications broadly plays in the campaign itself.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here. Um, I think that the role that communications is the essence of your campaign. You need to communicate in order to connect with voters. No one's going to vote for you if you haven't communicated with them around why you're running and why you're a good choice for them, regardless of what office you're seeking. So what I want to hit when I get into communications and digital communications is your message, your email audience, your social media channels and your website, and earned media. So when it comes
Right.
to your message, back when I was working on the Obama campaign way back in 2008, they introduced us to the teachings of Marshall Gans, Harvard Kennedy School professor, who's widely viewed as the father of modern organizing, and did a lot of great work organizing immigrant worker populations in California. And he introduced a concept known as the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And I think that's like to this day, whenever I'm talking to candidates, local candidates about their message and why they're running it, I very much ask them to ground their intro to about me, why I'm running, in the story of self, story of us, and story of now. And the story of self is really, describing why you specifically were called to this purpose. So telling a little bit about your story, the most compelling elements of it, the elements that show that you have the experience to succeed in this role. The story of us, what connects your story to your constituents, your community, and give it all a sense of common purpose, like why us in this moment. Um, and the story of now is what can we inspire to be, right? What can we hope to achieve together? So I think that fundamentally you want to talk about yourself. You want to have elements in your message and in your narrative that show that you're attuned to the needs of others, that you have experience. You want to make sure that you're highlighting what binds you to your community, and that you have a sense of what your community is all about, and that through your messaging you're creating a sense of community, and giving others a sense of what the community is all about, potentially even introducing new thoughts there. And then the story of now is what are we all going to do together, and that's very much about your vision, from a policy and getting things done perspective. So I typically recommend candidates start on their own, just drafting this up on a in a one page document, and that document turns into like the about us for your website, the about the campaign, and it can be chunked up into different versions, into like a short summary version, a version for email. But that's typically where I recommend folks start when it comes to thinking about their message.
And you can find some of the information more about the story itself online, right? People can search
Yeah,
and pull up what
absolutely,
that's about, right?
absolutely. And I definitely recommend. There's a lot of webinars out there. If you just kind of look at um, tools for messaging, or like you said, story of self, story of us, story of now, you'll find a lot of people that have kind of dove into these topics in more depth to kind of help you develop a lot of this into your own narrative.
And Aaron, this is something that's pretty important for folks to do early on in the process, right? Is to get this sort of nailed down to some degree.
I would, yeah. I mean, I would say that very early in the process, you want to have a first draft, And then that is something that you can iterate off of moving forward in your campaign. So you can have, different versions of this as you go. But you should definitely apply as much consistency to your messaging narrative as possible. Think about it as a house that you're building along the way rather than a new house that you're moving to throughout the process.
That's great. And for folks that are watching all of our series here, you might this kind of links back a little bit to you think about some of the different ways you're getting engaged, involved in your community. There's going to be so many aspects of those experiences that are probably going to end up being important parts of your narrative when you're running for office. And like Aaron's discussing, making sure you're tying those um, in a way that is really thoughtful and organized early on is going to be helpful, because just think about how many people you're talking to as a candidate every day, and you want to make sure you've really got that down and that you feel confident about it. So that's great, Aaron. What are some of the other kind of important aspects of the communications and digital piece of a campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So now I want to get into your email audience. And I start with the email audience because I think everyone out there has a Gmail account or some other type of email, like personal email account, where they've just been collecting contacts for years. And this is often, where I ask candidates running for local office to start is to just think about everyone in their network. Um, Go ahead and do a bulk export of your Gmail and start with that list and start cleaning that up. Because you're going to want an email audience to communicate with for big announcements, for your website when it's ready, for fundraising purposes. So there's no better place to start than your own list. And oftentimes this is something that can be a challenge for folks to go through and clean that up. I wouldn't worry too much about who wants to be on and who doesn't want to be on, because when you send your first email message, you're gonna have a disclaimer in that message that's gonna say, hey, sorry to be emailing you. I'm emailing you because you know I've I've known you. We've interacted before. If you don't want to get updates about my local campaign, feel free to unsubscribe here. I typically recommend that disclaimer goes at the very top when you're working with a new email list after the first, for the first couple sends. You can also ask organizations that you're working with closely if they don't mind you sending an onboarding email to their lists. You may, have worked with other campaigns. You may have been a campaign manager yourself, and you can go back to candidates and see if they wouldn't mind you using emails that they've collected. So there are other places to go to sort of build your initial list, but fundamentally, it's going to start with the contacts in your own personal universe. So you got to spend some time cleaning that up, and certainly thinking about what those first few emails look like. Typically, it's going to be an announcement about running. It's going to be something about fundraising, and it may or may not be a website that you've launched. Maybe the first version of your campaign website.
Great, great. All right, so we've got a little bit of a hone message. We've got our our initial email list figured out, and we've got maybe a schedule of the first couple emails going out. What are some of the next things that people need to be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned the website, so I'll go there next. You definitely want to launch your campaign with some sort of online property that's your own, that's not just on social media. This is a good place to introduce people to who you are and why you're running, going back to that messaging narrative that we talked about previously. And I think that having photography that introduces you to people, but people are going to be seeing you walking around the community. They're going to be seeing you at various events. So you definitely want to start to use your image in emails you're sending and social media on your website, so people start to recognize your face. because that makes you more approachable when you're out in the community. So definitely don't shy away from having lots of pictures of yourself up on the website, preferably with people, preferably engaging with diverse audiences in the community, and certainly background on who you are, some kind of statement of mission and vision and values for the campaign, and typically, a handful of issues that you're really passionate about, that you care about, that you're going to dive into deeper in the campaign. But don't get too carried away. I mean, I've seen a lot of candidates get hung up on the website, get hung up on the content, spend too much time, you know, working on the various policy and issue pages. And I think that keeping it simple is better, because a lot of this is going to change as you work more in your campaign and you kind of begin to talk to more voters and more stakeholders and get feedback on your message. You're going to want to change some of this. So, don't get too hung up on the initial version, but definitely, go live with something that you're proud of. And for the social media properties, this is going to be primarily your Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram profiles. Unless you're someone who has a lot of experience doing a lot of video, and you're going to be sort of doing your own campaign podcast and recording yourself and releasing a lot of video content as you go. You don't necessarily need a YouTube channel, at least not initially. Maybe once you get a male consultant or someone who's doing more, creative for you, and you start to get some videos from the campaign, then you'll go live with a YouTube channel. But right now, I'm focusing on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I think that, a lot of candidates, when they jump in, what they struggle with is, I've got my personal properties and, on social media, and I'm doing well with those. And, I have a lot of following there. And I'm not sure if I need to start new with, a campaign property. Typically, what I recommend is a little bit different for each property, but with Facebook, you are going to want to create your own campaign page, because Facebook pages have a very different functionality than personal accounts, and through your Facebook page, you can do a lot more with advertising. You can advertise from Facebook pages. And you can do some other things as well that you can't do from your personal account. So you're going to want to get that Facebook page started. And what you're going to want to do is, once you've launched it, you're going to want to go into your personal account and invite everyone to like the page. You're going to want to ask your closest friends to do the same, and sort of build out from that circle, asking as many people as you can to ask everyone in their Facebook audience to like the page. And that's how you're going to kind of get your initial audience on Facebook. And depending on the office, I mean, I'm thinking, if you're running for for mayor of a 20, 30,000 person town, getting 500 likes on your Facebook page when you first get started is like great, right? That's kind of where we're aiming for. I didn't get into numbers with the email list earlier, but I think that 1,000 people on your initial email list is really, really good, if you're kind of running for that local office. So, just think about it in those terms, and sort of scale a little bit as you go. Twitter, I think, you want to keep your personal account. That's where your followers are. That's where you've already made a lot of connections with influencers that you're going to want to continue to stay in front of on Twitter. So really, just updating your bio, maybe updating your handle on Twitter to reflect that you're running for office. And then Instagram, I would have the same advice, is to the degree that you can maintain your personal, and just convert it into a campaign profile, like, that's going to be better. Obviously, there are people that want to try to keep that separation between personal and public, and so they're going to start new Twitter handles and new Instagrams. And you can certainly do that, because if you want to go back to your private life after you've run for office, and that's a consideration for you, just know it's going to be harder to build up an audience from scratch than starting somewhere with an existing audience. So that's website and social media.
And sometimes it can be tough too. I mean, for people that have been using social media on a personal basis, it's very different. Like, I know, we've worked with candidates who, are familiar with social media because they're currently using it. and people who want to set up social media for the first time, but they've never used it personally before. And those might be two very different sort of ways into that. And what you want to do with the existing content that's on there and all of that kind of stuff. It's worth thinking through, how, like you said, how that might impact you publicly, privately, and making sure that whatever you're doing is going to conform to your state's election laws, and make sure that you're doing all of that the right way so that you don't have any surprises down the road. And one other quick thing I would add too is that these are opportunities for first impressions for people of you. And like Aaron said, I mean, you don't want to spend all your time on your website, which is very easy to end up doing. But you want to make sure that it's. I think you said it's something that you should be proud of, and that's exactly right. I know when I was running and I was, younger and kind of coming from the outside a little bit, having a really professional looking website that had a lot of really thorough information, a lot of detail, speaking to what I wanted to do. That was part of me communicating to the public, saying, "This is how this is in 2011." When I think there were people who were still sort of doubting whether social media was, sort of a valuable platform for communication or not. And part of what I was trying to communicate was that this is something that the government's going to do as well if I get elected. And so, especially if you're running on a technology savvy or communications heavy platform where you're talking about community engagement from the government perspective, you don't want to be talking about that and have a terrible Facebook page where you're not interacting with anybody who's asking you questions on your page. So make sure that the way that you're doing these accounts sort of reflects your values and your goals for being in office, as well. Um, so on the communication side, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about earned media and advertising as well.
Yeah, I think with earned media, what's important to keep in mind is that, you know, it's going to become more valuable the sort of the later in the later stages of the race, but you are going to benefit greatly by starting to build relationships with the reporters that are going to be covering your race early on. So, what do you need to know about earned media when you're just getting started? You need to know what type of publications are going to be covering your race, what kind of coverage is your race going to get. And if you're in a big city or in a major media market, that's going to be more than if you're out in a rural community that's being covered by kind of just like one newspaper. And of course, there's print media, but there's also online media as well. And there are blogs that do kind of local news reporting. There's different types of services that do local news reporting. There's different groups that run local newsletters or forums. So just being familiar with all of the places where people are going to get their information about the race is very important, and you can do that by simply by Googling people that have been active public officials who have run previously, most recently, and just kind of checking out some of the coverage that they've received. And then really looking at who the reporters are, and reporters definitely come and go. So you want to make sure that whoever you find is currently in their position, maybe following them on Twitter, maybe a couple months in, reaching out to them, seeing if you can get coffee with them and talk about your race off the record, hear a little bit more about what their interests are. So really just kind of building up that knowledge base around the media landscape in your race, and then slowly beginning to introduce outreach to all of your communications. So your communications are very much going to be an exercise in taking whatever news, whatever thing it is that you want to communicate, an announcement about your fundraising numbers, a specific policy that you want to emphasize, an event that you're doing, a reaction to something that happened in the community, and then customizing that message to each of your specific channels, your website, your email channel, your social media, and then think about the earned media channel, and try to start layering that in as another channel that you're using to communicate with the community. And you do that by sending out a press release. And I think that your press release can be very much grounded in the email that you're sending to your email audience, and just making a few tweaks. And it's very easy to find articles around sort of best practices for drafting press releases. But in today's age, like, reporters are very much used to seeing something that's kind of come off of a campaign's blog, or a supporter email, with a few tweaks. So you don't have to worry about it too much, but just know that, and don't expect a lot of coverage, right? I think if you're emailing a list of reporters about a very local race, 12 months out, 6 months out from the election, you may not get enough traction. But just showing the reporters that you're thinking about them, keeping them up to date on the things that you're going to be talking about, trying to talk to them once or twice, and beginning to build that relationship, that's going to serve you really well later on in the race. And obviously, just know that if a reporter does engage with you, and they want to comment, if you're speaking with them on the record, everything you say is fair game, right? So you just have to be aware of that. If you want to talk to them, and you don't want to be quoted for any reason, although as a candidate, I'm not sure that would really apply, but you can say you want to be on background, or even off the record. But generally speaking, if a reporter emails you in response to a press release you sent, or generally to get your a quote on something that's happened, be prepared to be on record as soon as you're on the phone with them.
Yeah, that's a great point for people to keep in mind. And you made another great point too that I just wanted to call out, which was not getting discouraged if you're not getting the traction early on from media. Not everybody is going to be as excited about you. I mean, really, as the candidate, you should be the most excited person about your campaign, and you probably will be. But not everybody else is going to respond that way in the beginning. And remembering that the communications side of your campaign, is not in sort of instant success. This is a plan that you have to put together and implement. And as you stay disciplined, and as you go through all the steps of continuing to do the messaging in some of the ways that we've talked about, you're going to build your engagement with people over time, and you're going to be able to pick up energy and momentum. But don't expect all of that from day one. So this was great. We talked a little bit about kind of identifying and honing the message about who you are and why you're running, building that initial email list from your contacts, from people that you're emailing professionally. And by the way, I'm pretty sure LinkedIn, you can still export contacts out of that as well. And so that might be a good resource if you're active on there. Talked a little bit about creating your website, making sure it's professional, but not getting lost and spending a ton of time on it. And same for your social media presences that are primarily probably going to be focused, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for most people, especially as you get going. And then a little bit about the outreach to local media and reporters, try and get them as well. So that was really great, Aaron, covering all those topics. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we sort of close out on this topic?
Yeah, just one thing that I didn't touch on when we were talking about email is obviously, you're gonna want to send using a sort of mass email service. You're not going to um, want to start sending emails from your personal email account. So you need to, we're not really touching too heavily on all of the various tools involved in getting set up with email, and with website and social media. But I do think that with email in particular, it's worth mentioning that the best practice is to start early on with a Mailchimp, or a Constant Contact, to load all of your contacts up, to use a template, to have your logo on the email, to send from a verified domain. It's really important that you start with best practices when it comes to email, and there's a lot more. If you sign up for a Mailchimp, they have great videos and resources on email best practices. So you want to start on the right foot there, because your email reputation is something that affects your deliverability.
And so, right, what that means is if you do this wrong in the beginning and you don't include an unsubscribe link, or you hit an email list that you haven't done before, and you don't give that disclaimer that Aaron mentioned, and people hit that spam button, that could really, really hurt how many people will see your future emails, because email programs, especially Google and Gmail, will learn that you might be a bad sender, and so it's worth doing that right from the beginning. So this was great. Why don't we move a little bit into how are we going to pay for doing all those things? How has this campaign got money to do that? Let's talk a little bit about fundraising.